Maalab na pagbati Pilipinas, sa ngalan ni Inday Espina Varona, ako si Edge Uyanguren, ang inyong mga kasama pansamantala sa episode na ito ng ALAB Analysis. Bago natin simulan ang ating episode, muling nagpapaabot ang Altermedia Network ng taus-pusong pakikiramay sa pamilya ng veteran journalist at press freedom champion na si Nonoy Espina, kapatid ng ating host na si Inday. Less than a year na lamang, presidential elections na naman, pero may pasabog kamakailan si President Rodrigo Duterte. Sineseryoso na raw niya ang pagtakbo bilang Vice President sa 2022 elections. Ang tanong ng marami, pwede ba yun? Yan ang tatalakayin natin ngayong gabi sa ALAB Analysis. Makakasama natin ang isa sa framers ng 1987 Constitution at dating chairperson ng Commission on Elections o COMELEC, si Atty. Christian Monsod. Maalab na pagbati, Atty. Christian. May ilang mga katanungan po kami para sa inyo, para po ilinaw ang usaping ito. Unang tanong po, nung isinulat ang 1987 Constitution, ano bang dahilan bakit nakalagay rito ng term limits, partikular sa presidente sa konstitusyon?
The central theme or the heart of our Constitution, according to the President then, si former Justice Cecilio Munoz Palma, is social justice and human rights. And there is a history to that. Right? We are a country of mass poverty and gross inequalities. And therefore, the social justice provisions attempt or are provided to address this problem. Okay? Now, the term limits are social justice provisions. And I'll tell you why, because if you look at Article 13, Section 1 of the Constitution on social justice, it says the Congress shall give highest priority to the enactment of measures that protect and enhance the right of people to human dignity. And then it says, reduce social, economic, and political inequalities, remove cultural inequities by equitably diffusing wealth and political power for the common good. And that's the same rationale for the ban on political dynasties under the Constitution, because you know, the root of our problem are political dynasties with the accompanying corruption that's been impervious to change for generations. That's why the context of the term limits is social justice. Right? So that if you're asking about the wisdom of it, or I don't know whether it's wise or not, but we thought that's why the heart of the Constitution is social justice. And if you note that that the term limits not only apply to the president. The president is one term, the vice president is 2 terms, senators are 2 6-year terms, and congressmen and local government officials are 3 3-year consecutive terms. So this applies to all. Also in some offices like COMELEC and so on, they have fixed terms, and they're not allowed anymore to be reappointed. So that is consistent with the social justice provisions of our Constitution. I just want to say, to add the tanong yung interpretation na may prohibition to serve more than 6 years. There is one exception, and that exception is also in Section 4, Article 7 of the Constitution. A person who succeeds to the presidency, a vice president who succeeds to the presidency and serves less than 4 years as president, as in the case of Arroyo, where she was able to serve for 10 years. That is the only exception to the prohibition of a maximum of 6 years. And that's specifically expressed, the same principle that you cannot do indirectly what you are not allowed to do directly.
At malinaw po, attorney, no, na talagang explicitly sinabing hindi pwedeng magpa-re-elect ang Pangulo sa anumang posisyon. Pero attorney Monsod, kung sakaling tumakbo nga at manalong Vice President si Pangulong Duterte sa 2022, paano nito maapektuhan ang pagpapatakbo ng gobyerno?
The mere fact of his stepping down. I mean, if that's a justification to say that, well, we should have continuous governance, then if you allow president, for example, to run for vice president in order to circumvent the constitutional intent, you are opening the door to every president saying, oh, I want to serve 12 years because of my governance to continue. Correct? Governance is a continuing thing for a democracy. Does not depend on one person.
Attorney Monsod, ito po bang move sa pagtakbo ni Duterte as VP ay na abuse of power?
No, well, let's put it this way, right? It's the provision says in Section 4 that the president shall not be eligible for any re-election. That is also can be interpreted as saying that he can serve for only one term, and that term is 6 years. Now, if you look at our constitution, because to me, in order to interpret provisions, you must take the constitution as a whole, not just one provision in isolation. Correct? That's why I mentioned the social justice. But if you take a look at the intent, what is the intent of the constitution? The intent of the Constitution is precisely to diffuse power. And when it says the president shall not be eligible for any election, it should be also interpreted that he should not serve for more than 6 years. Now, if he is allowed, if he is allowed to run for vice president, and there is a mandatory, succession that the vice president takes over if there's a vacancy, it is possible that people will create the vacancy for self-serving and personal reasons, right? It's possible, and because there can be a vacancy for death, impeachment, disability, or resignation. So it can be that the provisions of the Constitution can be circumvented by that, by the president running for vice president, and then the elected president steps down for him to go up to take over the presidency, diba? Now, to me, just looking at the news reports that the president was being asked by PDP Laban to choose his candidate president when he's running for vice president. That is very unusual. Usually, it's the president who chooses the vice president, but it's unusual. So you try to read what is the intent, and then they mentioned the two possibles are Senator Bongo and Sara Duterte. In fact, if it's Sara Duterte, that would be a violation of the principle of anti-dynasty. Why those two? Right? Parang to ensure that the vacancy is done by resignation. Parang ganon, no? Ang plano. And that is obviously a circumvention of the constitutional provision.
Kaya po ginagamit ang usapin ng continuity, no, bilang na kaya dapat tumakbo daw ang Pangulo. Pero attorney, pag-usapan naman po natin ngayon ang motibo. Bakit ba sa tuwing matatapos ang termino ng isang Pangulo, nagkakaroon ng iba't ibang attempt para sa term extension? For example, mula charter change, no, at ngayon VP candidacy. Ano ba ang motibo nila at gusto nilang manatili sa poder?
But you know, there's they say, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's not only President Duterte who appears to want to have a longer hold on the presidency. If you remember, President Ramos wanted to amend the constitution so that he can stay longer than 6 years, and the Supreme Court struck it down, that initiative. And then in the case of Arroyo, there was a proposal to shift to a federal system, which would have enabled her to stay longer in the position. It's all about power. There have been 6 previous attempts to change the constitution, and it's not been done because people see it as smoke screen for personal motives, not a country reason, right? 6 have failed. Because people realize, wait a minute, is this really for the country or for himself or herself?
Dako po tayo sa ating segment na Masa on the Street. Tinanong natin ang ating mga kababayan kung ano ang kanilang pagtingin sa planong pagtakbo ni Pangulong Duterte bilang Vice President. Panoorin po natin.
Sana po kung ikaw man lang ay tatakbo bilang Vice Presidente, tigilan mo na yan! Ibigay mo na yan sa karapat-dapat na tumakbo na dapat na maintindihan kaming mahihirap. Ibigay mo na yan, tama na yung inupo mo bilang Presidente.
Gusto ko sana, kung tatakbo siya at papalarin siyang manalo, mas gusto ko na, na mapokusan niya yung tungkol sa pagkain. Dahil sa ngayon, yun ang krisis natin.
Tatakbo siya at yung mananalo o dagdag pahirap na naman. Dadagdagan mo ng pahirap sa Pilipino. Kaya sa akin siguro, manahimik na lang siya. Kasi buhat nung maupo siya, halos lahat ng kamalasan inabot ng Pilipinas.
And we're back at nanonood pa rin kayo ng ALAB Analysis sa ngalan po ng ating host na si Inday Espina Varona. Ito po si Edge Uyanguren. At tinalakay po ni Atty. Christian Monsod ang posibleng pagbali ng ilang provisions ng konstitusyon sa planong pagtakbo ni Pangulong Duterte bilang Vice President. Attorney, nabalita na handa raw kayong mag-file ng petisyon para questionin ang pagtakbo ni President Duterte bilang VP sakaling mag-file talaga siya ng candidacy. Ano po yung mga hakbang na gagawin niyo, sir, para sa petisyong ito?
Alam mo, in these instances, the process begins at the COMELEC because once somebody files a certificate of candidacy in October, for example, then I assume the likelihood that other presidential candidates would petition the COMELEC to disqualify the president from running as vice president for the reasons we're discussing today. And whatever the decision of the COMELEC may be, the case will go up to the Supreme Court, certainly. Right? Now, in the case of Estrada, if you recall, Estrada was allowed by the COMELEC to run in 2010. And the reasons, as I remember, is that he did not finish his term. And what is interesting is the comment of the COMELEC that, moreover, more importantly, they said, Estrada is no longer the incumbent president, and with the vast powers of the executive. What's the implication of that? Is that when you're running for public office and you're the president, you have a lot of powers you can use for self-aggrandizement, right? That's why we have to interpret the Constitution in the light of the entire Constitution and the intent of the Constitution on social justice and to put term limits on elected officials, correct? That to me, that's the process that will arise. So it's unlikely that nobody will file a petition. But if nobody files, I'm willing to file.
Kahit umabot po hanggang Supreme Court, are you willing to lead the way, sir?
Well, it depends on what the decision is of the COMELEC and whether it will be brought up to the Supreme Court. But as a petitioner, it is up to the Supreme Court. The reason why I'm relying more on the candidates is that the Supreme Court has certain rules of what they call, do you have a standing in court, right? That point. And I think a candidate probably has more standing in court than myself.
Higit pa po sa isyu ng pagtakbo ni President Duterte, ayan na po, malapit na ang susunod na eleksyon. Ano pong payo ninyo sa ating mamamayan sa pagpili ng ating mga susunod na leader?
Well, there are many aspiring people, but I think the voters should think deeply about what kind of a governance they like. The rule of law must be part of that. Somebody who has both the capability and the decency to be president, and who has no ambitions beyond what is allowed by the Constitution. Well, 6 years is enough time for a good president to accomplish a lot. 6 years. And the limitation is a safeguard against anybody who wants to even stay longer than that 6 years. We're a people of 100 million, over 100 million population. There are many qualified people that you should open the door to a lot of people running for public office and for public positions. Why have a monopoly? Right? 6 years should be enough. That is when we were discussing this, na 6 years was really a compromise to the previous rule, law na 4 years plus 4 years of re-election, di ba? And we said, well, why don't we just have 6 years with no re-election? And that means also that there's a prohibition for serving more than 6 years, because that's one term, di ba? So sa akin, dapat pag-isipan mabuti ng mga kababayan natin. Ano ba talaga ang gusto natin para sa bayan natin at para sa, lalo na, doon sa mga mahihirap. Kasi yung promise of EDSA of a new social order has not been fulfilled by every administration since EDSA. Matagal na nag-aantay ang mga kababayan natin mahihirap doon sa bagong social order daw. Saan naroon yun? And that new social order is based on social justice. You know, social justice is about is about education and health. About education and health, the quality is the same whether for the poor or the rich. Wala pa yan. Tapos yung asset reform, agrarian reform, urban land reform and housing, di ba? Ancestral domain at saka fisheries, where the poorest of the poor are. They are under-implemented, correct? Because of family dynasties enacting laws that have loopholes and all that. Matagal na nag-aantay, mahihirap natin. Kasi ang sa akin, pag-isipin nyo mabuti, yung bang ating i-electin sa 2022, may alam ba yan? At dissenting tao ba yan?
Huling tanong, Atty. Christian, ano pong magagawa ng taong bayan para siguruhin ang mga lider na nahahalal sa posisyon ay hindi mang-aabuso sa kapangyarihan?
Well, it won't get to the Filipino people except to a vote. Ang ating inaasahan ngayon ay yung system of checks and balances ng ating gobyerno, of our democracy. Kasi once that system of checks and balances is dismantled or weakened by a powerful or too powerful president, then we have a problem of our democracy at peril. Correct? And therefore, people should think about that. And I think people have been thinking about that. If you look at the surveys, people don't like charter change, particularly if it involves extending the terms of the incumbent presidents. Right? And the Supreme Court has decided twice on that issue already. And what I'm more interested in and what we're doing, yung koalisyon ng election 2022 to register and vote. Sinasabi namin sa mga tao, mag-register kayo para marinig kayo. Kasi pag hindi kayo nag-register, kasi gusto nyo bumoto sa 2022, na you already lost by default the power of your vote. So sabi namin, lalo na yung mga kabataan natin, mag-register kayo at bumoto kayo kung sinong gusto nyo iboto nyo. But please register para hindi mawala sa iyo yung kapangyarihan mong bumoto.
Maraming salamat, Atty. Monsod, sa pagpapaunlak ng ating interview. Ayan, paalala po magrehistro, bumoto, at syempre, bago
Salamat
bumoto,
din po.
pagnilayan at pag-isipan po natin. Sabi nga ng ating guest na si Atty. Christian Monsod, halos lahat ng presidente na patapos na ang termino ay sinubukan in one way or another na mag-extend ng termino. Mula charter change hanggang sa balak ngayong pagtakbo bilang Vice President, mukhang gagawin ang lahat para manatili sa poder ang maraming presidente, including President Duterte. Bakit nga ba? Dahil na rin sa kapangyarihang dala ng posisyon at sa mga pansariling interes na pilit pinoprotektahan. At sa kaso ni Pangulong Duterte, dahil na din sa pag-iwas na mapanagot at makulong dahil sa mga krimeng itinuturo sa kanya. Sumatotal, kapag gustong manatili sa poder, hahamakin ang lahat kahit ang konstitusyon. Pero may magagawa ang sambayanan. Hindi pwedeng hayaan na lang ang mga may balak sa laulain kahit pa ang konstitusyon. Muli po, ako si Edge Uyanguren sa ngalan ni Inday SP Navarona para sa ALAB Analysis.